Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Women's History Month. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Connecticut and the Capital Information Tourist Program on Connecticut Women in Politics, Past, Present, and Future. I am Laura Smits, President of the League of Women Voters of Connecticut and your moderator for this webinar. We will be taking questions at the end, so if you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A and hopefully we can get to as many as possible. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Our esteemed panelists are Maxwell, who's going to talk to us about the past, who currently serves as Chair, Board of Governors of Off the Record, a program of the Foreign Policy Association. She is the former Executive Director of the World Affairs Forum in Stamford, Connecticut, and has served as the 16th President of the League of Women Voters of the U.S. and is also a past President of the Connecticut League. She is still our go-to League member for advice and trains our members in all things related to debates. As an active participant in the U.S. Department of State's International Speakers and Citizens Connect programs, she traveled extensively to conduct civic participation training for women, political NGOs, and business leaders. Ms. Maxwell was a member of the American Bar Association's Blue Ribbon Commission on the American Jury and is a member of the International Women's Forum and the Women's Foreign Policy Group. She's a former chair of the Planned Parenthood of Southern New England Board and previously served on the board of the Women's Campaign School at Yale University. Welcome, Kay. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
We really appreciate your experience as a leader of a league, as well as someone who's been involved in politics and nationally and internationally for a long time. What was it like back in the day when what were some of the challenges that you saw back in the 80s and 90s when you started with the league? Because things were a lot different then than they are now.
Well, in some ways they were different, but in some ways they're still the same today. I first joined the league when I was living in the DC area, and that was in the late 70s, early 80s. And of course, the Equal Rights Amendment had passed Congress, and so that was a major focus of the league. But I guess one thing I do want to say is that too many people think politics is a dirty word, and it's not. It's important. And politics is not just getting elected to office. Politics is being engaged in a campaign, running for office yourself, lobbying, all kinds of things. So lobbying on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment in Congress at the time, and we're all volunteer lobbyists with the league, but one of the highlights or lowlights was trying to lobby Orrin Hatch, who was then a very, very conservative member of Congress on the Equal Rights Amendment. But that was a different time and place. You couldn't do those things today, probably.
What was his objection to it, really?
Yeah, no, you're asking me to remember way, way back.
I'm just trying to think. I can think of what. Go ahead.
Well, part of it was just, oh, it's not necessary. It's just not necessary, was the basic answer that you were getting from most people. But then I came up to Connecticut, and of course, the first thing I did was get involved with the League of Women Voters. And I served as the president from 89 to 93. And of course, Connecticut had a history of, having had a women governor and various female elected officials, which was very different from Virginia at the time. So it was kind of a pleasant to come up to Connecticut and have a different political landscape up here. But during that time, we were really working on things like passing an assault weapons ban. We were successful at that, and passing the income tax. So it was an interesting time to be involved with the Connecticut League and lobbying the legislature. And sadly, at that point in time, state legislators were getting their tires slashed when we were trying to get the income tax passed, et cetera, which seemed horrible at the time, but the way things are going lately, sadly, we see too much of this kind of thing as we move along. At the national level of the league, I became president in 2002, and of course that was just after the 2020 election with all of its associated problems. And so Congress had passed the Help America Vote Act. So really the major focus when I was national president was on how to implement that act. I did a lot of travel around to the various states explaining what was new with that act so that people would know what they could and couldn't do and what was new and better when they would go to the next election. So a lot of that, also the Patriot Act, we were heavily involved in lobbying regarding that and not letting that act overpower civil rights, civil liberties. So the whole civil rights, civil liberties was a major focus of the League at that point in time. So those were the kinds of things that we were involved with as we moved along. And then, of course, I was on the board of the Women's Campaign School here at Yale, because I know that that's been going strong now. So there are all kinds of things, organizations, groups that support women in all kinds of political ways that didn't exist 30, 40 years ago.
What year did the campaign school start? When was that?
Good question. I can't give you the date offhand.
Can't remember how long it's been. It seems to me that it's
about
been around
20.
For a long
I was going to
time.
say 20 years or something like that. It's small and started. It's grown and become more and more robust. So that's it's been a major thing that Connecticut women got started and are putting on programs for not only women here in the U.S., but women come from abroad internationally, to take part in those training sessions, which are terrific. But I would just also toss out that if you're interested in the history of women in political office, there's a terrific organization. It's a Center for Women in Politics at Rutgers University. And they have you can click on Connecticut, for example, see the whole history of women being elected to executive positions in Connecticut, the legislatures, what were the percentages as they went along with state legislatures. So all kinds of history of women in politics in general is accessible there. And it really is a terrific resource if you're interested in anything relating to women in politics. The history up to obviously the latest information is there as well.
What were some of the challenges as far as women getting involved in politics back then, besides the obvious that, women shouldn't be in politics? What was it? Was it something that the League members were involved in helping at the local level, or was it something where, they just generally did not want to get involved in campaigns because of the partisan nature of it?
No, I don't think there was not the partisan nature of it, because partisanship was not then what it is today, certainly. But I think for a lot of women early on, many were not working full-time outside the home. The League was sort of the go-to place for intellectual stimulation, for learning about issues, et cetera. So that was really, and they just didn't have that many opportunities for jobs and professions, careers outside of teaching. Those were the kinds of things that most people did. Obviously, I'm going back a ways, but women were always interested in politics writ large, in my experience, at least those who came to the League and participated in the League. It was simply a question of how are we going to participate? And the League, for example, was a great way to participate in politics. Of course, the focus is always with the League on issues themselves, nonpartisan. So that obviously has always held great appeal. I think particularly for the women who've been involved. So the League served that wonderful purpose of being involved in politics. And we also always encouraged our members, and still do, to get active in politics themselves, whatever party they are. We encourage them. The League is not just coming together and talking about issues. It's encouraged the members to get out and get involved in politics in all aspects of it. So it was a wonderful opportunity.
Forget that back in the day, it was kind of like, okay, if you wanted to get involved, it was the PTA or the League. And that was kind of like it. It wasn't so much to get, women elected necessarily, but it was just to get involved in your community. Right. And the nonpartisan appeal. That's one of the things that I like about the League is its history of not just registering voters, but educating voters about the issues, because I think it definitely gives people a much more confident to go and make that actual vote. And I think that's what we're seeing happening now. Certainly there's a lot more grassroots organizations. We have some panelists that are going to talk about that later, but it's kind of amazing how far we've come. Because even when I joined the League in '99, when I came back to the state from being away, I was amazed at how because I was a stay-at-home mom, because my, travel and all, we all kind of got involved. They were like, well, aren't you going to join the PTO? And I said, not if I don't have to. I mean, I have kids, but my whole life isn't about my kids. What else is available? And that's how I got involved in the league, because it was one of those places where you could talk about issues that were important. And it wasn't just about diapers and teachers and all of those things, which are important, but they certainly don't, they're very small. And I wanted to be involved with bigger, more community change and that kind of.
And even though we encourage members to be involved in politics, we don't, I don't know if I'm with a group of League of Women Voters, women, who's a Democrat, who's a Republican, whatever. That's just not been part of what we care about. And obviously we want the membership to be as broad as possible. And I say we focus on nonpartisanship, especially with all the debates that we do. It's one manifestation of all of that. But we want women to be, and not just women, we want everybody to be engaged, because the only way we're going to have a healthy democracy is if our population gets involved. And we still have a ways to go.
And we definitely do. And I know that this was the first, what you're talking about is interesting, about how you didn't really know what affiliation anybody had. And that really wasn't a problem for us until very recently in the league, when like suddenly people are asking, well, our moderators, are they Democrats or they're Republican? What are they? And I'm like, I don't know. That's not something we ask on the forum, because we just understand when you become part of the league that you're nonpartisan to start with.
Right.
So that's,
and if you serve as the president or head of voter service, you're restricted in certain ways from political participation. But the general membership, like I say, we want people to be involved in politics.
Right, and that's how I got my start when I ran for office. Very briefly, short period of time. And that's the other thing. I have a question for you. Did you ever think about running yourself?
Had I stayed living in Virginia at the time, I might have, because the woman I replaced as president of the Fairfax County League of Women Voters, she had run for the state legislature. And then actually she was one of the women who in 1992, that was called the Year of the Woman. And she has joked since that, yes, it was the 1 year of the woman, because so many of them were elected and 1 year later gone again. Of course, a lot of that came out of the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, and all of that sparked a lot of interest in women running for office.
Well, that does seem, and then that kind of is, that makes sense, because it seems like whenever there's some more sunlight, we get a little more transparency and people see how things work, and they're like, wait a minute. Especially, I know I was home with babies when Anita Hill happened, and I just remember watching the television saying, look at all these white guys telling everybody what's going to happen here. It was just really frightening to me that, wait a minute, this is not a representative democracy. Half of us aren't even there. Forget about
true.
So it was just kind of like a real shock to the system. And that's what was great about it, is that when you have those televised kind of hearings and you see what your government is really doing, and that's what we always encourage people to come up to the Capitol and take a look at the building, go watch some hearings, take part in it, because I think when you do that, it takes a lot of the intimidation out of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're much more inclined to get involved at a level that's a little more granular than just, reading the paper or reading something online and saying, I want to help with that. When you were talking about the income tax, I don't know if people realize that Connecticut didn't have an income tax. Because what year did that income tax happen? Because that must have been a very big battle.
Well, like I said, I can't tell you precisely the year, but I was Connecticut president from 89 to 93. So Lowell Weicker was the governor. So it was that time period. Yeah, the league lobbied very hard for an income tax because we felt that the state having only the sales tax was discriminatory, and that we needed a graduated income tax. But it was quite a battle. Ultimately, obviously got it passed, and it is still with us today. Although others have vowed to get rid of it at the time. And as I say, the other was the assault weapons ban, and that's one that I wish we had made a lot more progress on that one since then. But at the time, testifying, I did some testimony before one of the state legislative committees, and I think there were 3 of us who were testifying in favor of the assault weapons ban, and they were like about 200 or 300 folks who were there opposing it. And of course, that was at the time when, you know, you didn't go through magnetometers and all those kinds of things. I look back and think, boy, that was a simpler time in terms of what we expected of people, and how shocked we were just at with the income tax. Like I say, some state legislators got their tires slashed and that sort of thing, and that seemed horrendous at the time. Sadly, today that seems rather minor compared to some of the things that go on today.
I know. I think the assault weapons ban, it was allowed to sunset. Is that how that worked out correctly?
Yeah.
It wasn't renewed?
Correct. Yeah.
That was, the NRA has a lot of power. You know, I think we have to really start looking at our lobby, who the big lobbies are in this country, and what we can do to sort of tame some of that. Citizens United certainly didn't help
No.
with that one. It certainly did not help. So when you were doing a lot of your work with the local leagues and the state league, did you find that you had a lot more members working on specific things back then? Were there certain advocacy issues that you really, obviously the voting rights one was one. Were you, I know that our Lieutenant Governor will be joining us shortly, and she was part of the HAVA time period and helped with those machines and the changeover that we are now talking about. Those tabulators are nearing the end of their life because we were able to get them with the HAVA. Was it one of those things? Was that something that the league was involved in the Help America Vote Act?
Oh, sure. And as I say, what I did, a lot of what I did as the national president then was to travel around prior to the next presidential election, visited all of the swing states and worked with local leagues, did a lot of TV, radio interviews, that kind of thing, trying to spread the word. And so that was something that really got state level leagues and local leagues involved with around the country, because I think it was 5 things voters needed to know. I'm not sure I could remember exactly what those 5 things were, but you could cast a provisional ballot. I mean, there were certain things like that. So it was a massive media campaign and hard work on the part of leagues across the country to try and let people know what their rights were when it comes to voting, and what they could and could not expect at the polls. So that was did a lot on, like I say, from the national with CNN and MSNBC to local TV and around the country. And being in the swing states before a presidential election is a unique experience in and of itself. Not having lived in a swing state in the past, it was very interesting to be in Iowa and places like that ahead of a presidential election. But the focus, as I say, with the league, that was where we were focused. We also, as I say, put out and did a lot of research and put out some reports on civil liberties, concerns with the Patriot Act and that sort of thing. So those were really the two things and were being worked on, as I say, at all levels of League Women Voters across the country.
So you were around before the internet, basically before cable news. How did you get the word out to people? What was the way that you were able to do that?
I'm chuckling because I remember how excited we were at the Connecticut League office when we got a fax machine. It was just so exciting. Well, in some respects, it was hard. Obviously, we put out a lot of press releases. You always were struggling, though, to try and get your message out because you had limited outlets. You had, your TV stations, your radio stations. There weren't that many, and there were lots of competing folks with press and trying to get coverage. What's happened today, I think, is just the opposite. You've got so many avenues. Yeah, you can get your message out, but it's a tiny thing in the universe of what everyone is trying to get out to people. So in some respects, I think it's harder today to get a coherent message out than perhaps it was back in the simpler days.
Right, before we had some ways to go about it. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz.
Hello, nice to see so many smart, competent women. Always my favorite thing.
Thanks so much for joining us. Kay, if you can stay with us and mute yourself, and we'll hope to get some questions for you later on in the program. I know the Lieutenant Governor has a limited amount of time, so we're going to go right to her. I'm going to give you a quick bio. Sworn in on January 4th, 2023, Susan Bysiewicz is serving her second term as Connecticut's 109th Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz is continuing her commitment to economic growth that made her a leading voice for Connecticut residents and small businesses while she served as Secretary of the State from 1999 until 2011. As Secretary of the State, she helped thousands of businesses grow, registered thousands of voters, cut bureaucratic red tape, honored veterans, and fought to keep elections fair. She was also a state representative in the Connecticut General Assembly for the towns of Middletown, Middlefield, and Durham. Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz is the proud granddaughter of immigrants who came to Connecticut from Poland and Greece with nothing but hopes for a better future. She lives with her husband, David Donaldson, in Middletown. Welcome, welcome, Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for having me. I just love the League of Women Voters, and it was just such a privilege as a legislator and the leader of the Government Administration and Elections Committee to work with you all and then continue that work as Secretary of the State. And the fight continues for early voting. So thank you, ladies, for everything that you're doing, because this work is really important.
Thank you. It certainly is. And one of the things we were just talking, Kay was talking about HAVA, and I recall that you were there right in the thick of that as Secretary of the State. What was that like to get that done? I mean, I was sitting there as a registrar. I know about tabulators and I know how long they're going to live or not.
Right. So go back to pre-tabulators, right? Go back to lever voting machines. And I was sworn into office in 1999. And then we had the 2000 election debacle, Bush versus Gore. I'll never forget, the month that we didn't really know who the president was going to be. And my daughter, who was 5 at the time, said to me during that time period, "Mom, why can't Al Gore be president for 2 years and George Bush be president for 2 years?" I'm like, great idea. It's too simple. Adults would never think of that.
That's right. Out of the mouths of babes. Exactly. They have all the good news.
Exactly. And to your point, the great thing about that election was it showed people how their votes, every vote counts and every vote matters. But all of a sudden people appreciated and understood what secretaries of the state do. So I was very thankful for that. And I remember working with Chris Dodd on the Help America Vote Act. And he said, "Susan, what things should we put into the bill?" And I said, "We need to put into the bill that every town has to be connected to our centralized voter registration system," because at that point, we still had, like a dozen towns, maybe 2 dozen that had not been connected. I mean, we literally had towns that had no computers in the town hall. And so I said, "Can you please make it a federal requirement that every town must be part of that, because we need to know that someone's not registered in multiple towns. It will protect voter rights and it will prevent voter fraud." And I was delighted that he put that in there. And I was delighted that our state got $33 million of federal funds to purchase the machines for us that have a paper record, which is a requirement now in further voting legislation that is before our Congress right now. And Secretary Thomas is looking for the funding to now replace those voting machines, which has served us really, really well.
Right. I remember the paper trail discussion was a big one. And that was something that I thought at the time was, do we really need it? And since then it's become really prescient about how to do it right. Because we're not hooked into the internet. We're not, we need the internet, but we're not hooked into it. That's a big difference that not everybody understands.
That's right. And I think of the Chris Poulos state representative race, one vote, and they were able to look at every ballot to make sure that he indeed was the winner.
Right, right. So tell us at your time when you were running for office, what was the environment like for you as a woman running when you first got elected? And then obviously now where you are, you've definitely risen through the ranks, which is terrific, which is what we want to see, more leadership, more women in leadership. So what were some of the challenges you faced back then, and how do you feel it's going now?
Well, I'll say that I will never forget door knocking as a state representative candidate, and, knocking on someone's door, presenting a walk card, that I would take with me that had a picture of me, my husband, with my husband holding our daughter, Ava, who is 5 months old in the picture, and knocking on the door. And I said, "Hi, I'm Susan. I'm running for state rep." And a gentleman who answered the door looked at the card and said, "You should be home with your baby." And it was just one of those moments where I took a deep breath and I said, "Sir, my daughter is exactly why I am running for office. I'm concerned about her future. I'm concerned about the environment, public safety, education. And so I did that for a couple of minutes. And then the gentleman looked at me and said, "Okay, I'll vote for you."
Oh, wow.
And yeah, but we'll never forget this. Oh, you shouldn't be running for office. You should be home with your baby. And then after that, we continued campaigning. My husband and I actually would call it the cute baby vote, because people would look at the card, go, "Oh, what a cute baby. I'll vote for you."
Babies and dogs and cats, right? Pets and babies.
I guess so. I would say this because we are the day after International Women's Day. And I do want to say that we have a record number of women serving in office in the legislature, but it's only 33% of our legislature. I love now going into the state Senate and seeing 12 women of the 36 in the Senate circle. That's great. But we are nowhere close to 50%. And if you'd asked me when I first started as state representative, when are we going to get to 50%? I would have said, gee, I hope 10 years from now. Well, we are still fighting that fight. And I look at the US Congress, where we have 25% women in the Senate and about the same in the United States House. And the numbers haven't been growing. And I see that we have more to do. As I look at governors, we have a record number of governors with 12 women governors out of 50. We've never had that many, but there are still 18 states that have never had a female governor.
Right.
So much work to do. I also look around. It's ebbed and flowed at the highest levels of our state government. I remember a moment when Jody Rell was governor, and Denise Napier, Nancy Wyman, and I were also in state constitutional office. So 4 of the 6 of us were women, and that was impressive, but now we have 2. So
like 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of thing, right? It's
right. Right. And I look at our legislative leadership, both in terms of our Republican and Democratic leadership, and there aren't any women who are in those roles. And we had a moment where we had a female speaker in Moira Lyons and female deputy speaker and House Majority Leader. And so I want to encourage, and I did yesterday, I encouraged my Republican and Democratic legislative colleagues to run for statewide office, and to think about running for Congress, to run for leadership positions in their own parties, because I think that's important.
So what do you think what would you tell young people now getting involved, how they should start? Where do you think is a good place to start? I know sometimes it seems kind of daunting. It was interesting. We had some folks running for office this past election season who just jumped right in and ran for Congress, having done nothing at the local level. And so I'm always curious about that. What do you think is a good place to start?
So I always tell young people who think they're interested in government or elective politics, just go volunteer at your local Democratic or Republican Party town committee. First of all, they would love to have a young member, so you could probably become a member right away and show up for 3 days, and they'll be asking you to run for office, because it's becoming very difficult to find people to run for Board of Ed. There's been a lot of rancor, and issues discussed by boards of ed across the state. It's hard to find people to run for planning and zoning, Board of Finance, zoning board of appeals, town council even. So I always tell people, just contact your local Democratic or Republican Party. They'd love to have you. It's going to be so much fun. You'll be able to meet everyone from your state representative, your state senator, your congressperson, your mayor, your first selectman. That's one of the beneficial things of a small state. You can have all kinds of powerful people in a room.
That's true. That's true. And it's very important, especially this year as a local election. People don't realize that local elections are the ones that really impact your life, much more so than the state and the national. I mean, you can really have an impact. And I know that
they're a launch pad for local office, is a launch pad for state representative, for mayor, all kinds of things.
Right. It's really important to start knowing the process at the local level so you can build on that relationship. That was really important. I know that you have a limited amount of time, Lieutenant Governor. I don't see any questions specifically for you. I don't want to keep you. I know that we are going to lose you soon. So I really appreciate your taking the time to spend with us.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for doing what you do.
Hopefully people will come and see you up at the Capitol.
Yes, please, anytime. And run for office, ladies.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to continue our program. We have two incredible, that was the present. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz. We're on to the future. We're on to positive things, and we're going to talk about the future. And with us today are two women who are really making a difference locally, which is a really important thing. I'm glad we ended up with that, because this is perfect for what we're going to talk about now. Callie Heilmann is the founder, president, and co-director of Bridgeport Generation Now, a grassroots member-based organization that strengthens civic engagement in Bridgeport residents and in their community. Callie was born and raised in Hartford and is the third generation in her family to attend Hartford public schools. Growing up in a family committed to civic life, a sense of place, and public education shaped Callie's lifelong commitment to social justice. A graduate of Tulane University with degrees in women's studies and art history, she also holds a master's of arts at NYU in visual culture and a master's in education from Hunter College. City University of New York. After Bridgeport's 2015 mayoral election, Callie organized the first founding members of Bridgeport Generation Now in a room to begin building a movement. And in May of 2016, she held Gen Now's first official member meeting. She currently serves on the advisory boards of PT Partners and the Smilo Borough's Wakeman Boys and Girls Club. Callie believes deeply in the power of organized people to move the places that matter to them toward positive social change. Okay, that's Callie. And her partner in crime, as it were, partner in good, is Gemeem Davis, is the vice president and co-director of Bridgeport Generation Now. Passionate about democracy, Gemeem was born, raised, and educated in Bridgeport and holds a degree in film from Pratt Institute. After living in New York City for many years, she moved back to Bridgeport in 2016, intent on making a positive impact on the lives of the people in her hometown. Gemeem became a member of Bridgeport Gen Now in 2017, was voted on its board as vice president in 2018, and has shared the role of co-director with Callie since 2019. As a testament to Gen Now's mission, Gemeem has successfully developed into a respected community leader whose independent voice is often called upon by the community, media, and elected officials. In 2020, Bridgeport City Council appointed Gemeem to the Bridgeport Advisory Task Force on Public Safety. She has served as an elected member of Bridgeport's Democratic Town Committee and is also the president of Bridgeport Generation Now Votes, the 501c4 affiliate of Bridgeport Generation Now, committed to increasing voter education and turnout in Bridgeport elections. Thank you so much, Callie and Gemeem, for being here with us. You guys are right on the front lines. I mean, this is just a great, I'm so glad you guys are here. And a lot of the questions that have come in are really about exactly what you guys do, which is, I think I'd like you to talk about what kind of passion you had to create Gen Now, and tell us a little bit about Bridgeport Generation Now, just for folks so they can understand where you guys are coming from.
Sure, I'll start and then I'll pass it to Gemeem. We know this 1-2 dance well. So the passion that started Bridgeport Generation Now was really out of the chaos that was the 2015 mayoral election in Bridgeport. It really
talk a little bit about that, because not everybody knows about what kind of went down, if you will. Just real quick, just a little bit of that, just so people understand where we're coming from in context.
Yeah, it was a 3-way primary, 4-way primary election in Bridgeport. For those who don't know, almost 70% of our registered voters are registered with the Democratic Party. So the primary elections tend to be the elections that matter most. So in 2015, we had a 4-way primary between Bill Finch, who was the incumbent, Mary Jane Foster, who was coming from the University of Bridgeport, a local, it was a 3-way primary, Mary Jane Foster, and then Joe Ganim, who is our current mayor, who had been mayor in the 90s, who was forced to resign on charges of federal corruption, and then ended up serving 7 years in federal prison. So he had come back and was waging this comeback campaign, comeback story. And, that year, Bridgeport voters were subjected to a summer of just chaos. So, everyone thought Bill Finch was going to get the endorsement from our local party. He missed the endorsement vote by like 1 vote. And so he didn't get endorsed, and Joe Ganim did. And that threw the whole thing into like this chaos. And on the ground, because at its core, Bridgeport Generation Now is the voice of voters. So on the ground, what I kept hearing and, talking with people that summer, it was that none of the candidates were talking about issues. And as a voter, you were really just subjected to the gossip, the personality politics, and the sort of campaign shenanigans that were going on. So voters in Bridgeport were feeling frustrated, disenfranchised, sort of shut out. You know, their voices, our voices weren't being heard. And really, you know, we didn't know it at the time, but there was a feeling that the people of Bridgeport were being shut out from our own democracy. And so what happened is, after that election cycle, in which Joe Ganim successfully got reelected as mayor, I brought some people into a room to say, okay, we just went through that, right? And it's similar to how Americans felt after the 2016 presidential election and after the 2020 presidential election, right? There's a lot of conversations happening in rooms. This one happened to be in Bridgeport, where the conversation is about our democracy is at stake. Our livelihood is at stake. Our way of life is at stake. What do we want to do about it, right? Mm-hmm. Not who's going to fix it for us, not who do we need to yell at, not, you know, whose fault is it? It's what is it that we are all willing to do? Because it really felt like we had a choice. We could either give in to the cynicism of our votes don't matter. In Bridgeport, our votes don't matter. We could give into that, or we could organize ourselves and our neighbors and our friends to form a resistance movement that was going to shape a different future for the city. So we've been doing that work on the ground for 7 years now, and have really built a political home for people in Bridgeport who know exactly what the issues are, and who have been telling us, you know, every year for 7 years, the issues in Bridgeport are education, our public schools, it's public safety. We want to improve our police department. The issues are, we need free and fair elections. We have a really big problem with absentee ballot abuse in Bridgeport. And so because we know what the issues are, we're not confused about
a long list. Those are some hard problems.
Yeah.
They're not solved overnight.
Yeah. And I'll pass it to Gemeem. Yeah.
Do you have a specific question, or should I?
Well, I mean, Gemeem, kind of like what was just as Callie has kind of like, it's interesting. I'm always trying to figure out I know what made me get involved. And I'm always wondering, you know, what can we tell young people? And sometimes it's something like this, you know, like there's a crisis and like, my gosh, what can I do about it? But sometimes it's just, you grow up in for instance, Nancy Pelosi, right? She grew up in a household where you went and voted. My mother took me to vote at the lever machines, right? Everybody has that experience. And if you're in a household like that, you have that experience, but not everybody does. So sometimes what was the thing for you that said, you know what, I'm going to step up, I'm going to get involved?
Yeah. I talk about this often sometimes, but, you know, in my household, you know, my mother also took me to the lever machines, and I first voted on, you know, those machines. In Bridgeport, when I was in high school, in the late 80s, we really had a principal and a school culture that was really focused on service. My principal used to always say, work hard and be nice. And
good advice.
Yeah, very good advice.
Simple.
And it was really during that time where I was young, and I was taking civics class, and we had to go out and volunteer. Like, in order to graduate, you had to do volunteer hours, and so all of these things were floating around, like in my world. And so I had moved through my young adulthood with that sense of, well, there's something bigger. There's something else I need to do. And I really just gave myself time to grow. And by the time I decided to move back to Bridgeport in 2016, you know, I was like, you know, middle age, approaching middle age, and really like, well, what is it? How else do I want to spend the rest of my time here on earth? Who knows how long that will be? And if I'm going to help to impact people, in particular young people, where would I want to do that? And there was a very strong calling to go home and to get involved, because from the time when I was young, I was always like, I would say like social justice adjacent, you know, I would go to a march, I would, you know, I always voted, you know, I volunteered, I always tried to make sure that I was in some role to give back in service. So that was really the catalyst for me. You know, it was like a thread that since I was young, that kind of stayed with me, and the desire to help young people have that outlook, and that thread was really the driving force of why I personally came back home and wanted to do it, because I was born and raised in Bridgeport. Yeah.
That's important to have roots. You know, just come back and help make things better. Was there ever a time when you thought you might have, it got too much? You're like, what am I doing this for? I mean, was it, I'm sure when you guys started Gen Now, it was a little bit of a struggle to get started. Was it something that you were just committed to and said, we got to do this. We got to do this. You know, there's some like moment of crisis that you guys had, or are you still kind of building?
Well, we're in a constant moment of crisis.
I think we can all relate to that.
You know, and honestly, yes, like we have through the years really learned, and the learning and the analysis that we have learned and come to understand is the thing that continues to push us. So yes, it is very hard, you know, to you know, when you are going up against like a machine, you know, it's very easy to sometimes be like, well, what the heck, what is going on? But I do believe that deep in our consciousness, Callie and I and other members of Gen Now believe strongly in democracy. We believe strongly in the power of community organizing and togetherness. And that gives us the strength and the will to keep moving forward, because at the end of the day, we know we're on the right side of history. We know that what we fight for is not for our own personal gain or individual gain. It is for the development of young minds and hearts in Bridgeport, and to get a city on a path that is joy-filled, that allows for people to pursue their own version of happiness, and really cares deeply about our place and the country itself. So we are very secure in that. And so the obstacles that come up, we just take them and keep going.
Right. So how do you get young people? Because one of the struggles that we have at the League is getting, especially young people, as well as people who work multiple jobs and can't have the time. I mean, I'm a self-described media junkie. I read everything. But that's just who I've always been. I'm an English major and I've always been a reader and a writer. So for me, it's an easy thing to do. But I know sometimes when I go out there, certainly as a voter service vice president, as well as the president, there's just so many places to find information and so little time to look for decent information. What kind of What do you tell people when they want information, where to go to find it? How do you direct them and get them their information? What do you tell them?
Yeah. Do you want to take that, or Cal?
Yeah. Well, I think it's two things, of two sides of the same coin. One is the engagement piece. So we have some core principles at Gen Now. One of them is like, be together but not the same. So it's a core value principle about inclusivity. So we have to like create the container for Gen Now that's very clear. We have monthly member meetings, that are always at this time. And so the consistency is really important so that people know exactly where to find us and when to find us. But we also have to diversify our tools for engagement because we want to be together, but we aren't the same. So like people aren't going to be able to come every month, at 7 o'clock if they're working 2 jobs or if they work the night shift, And so the other side of that coin is it's always about consistency, to be honest. And the other side of that coin is communication tools. So we have to be able to get a message out about what information is important and where to find it. And we do that through an email newsletter. We do that through social media, and we do that through, getting out into the community, like through things like this, but also like at, we go to like the Puerto Rican Day Parade and the Juneteenth, event, and we're out in front of people all across Bridgeport to make sure that they know that we are a resource for information, and the information that we're giving them is about the voice of the voters and what voters care about. So, it's a lot of work, and it's just Gemeem and I. So, we have members that are at every level. So that's the other thing that we always have to be mindful of. There's like a core group of people who are really committed and able to come to pretty much everything. And then we have, members who open our emails every week and send us messages like, keep up the good work. And then we have the people who are following us on social media who eventually join as members, right? So there's, it's like an ecosystem, really.
It's a struggle. I'm always concerned. I have a couple of millennial children in my life, and I'm always concerned when they tell me they found something on Reddit. I'm like, well, where did you find, where did you find that on Reddit? Is that a good place for information? And it's getting better. I mean, that's the thing that gives me a little bit of hope about, the future, because we have so many different ways of getting things. We don't have one channel, 3 networks, right? We have 150,000 if you want. And everything it's too easy in a way. And certainly this was my feeling growing up. When you have 3 networks and we're all on the same page, they all do look alike and they're all saying the same truth. Whereas now you can, if you don't like the truth, whatever CBS or the networks determine is the truth, you can go find your truth on some other place. And that is really frustrating because it's hard to control that message and get it so that it's factual. And right now we can't all agree on what the truth is. So it's really kind of frustrating. So here's a question that someone submitted, which is kind of an interesting question. And it's kind of, if someone gave you $5 million with no strings attached, what would you do with it?
That's interesting, because that's the question we've been asking community members in Bridgeport at every event we go to. We ask them what would they fix, what would they do with the money in Bridgeport, and so if the question was asked to me, I would definitely say we would use that money to address the issues in Bridgeport that people care about. That is what we do with all the resources that we have. because I don't need $5 million, to be honest with you. Like personally, I don't need $5 million, but my, civic organizations in my community need that money. We have a great organization in Bridgeport called PT Partners, which is a resident-led organization who are working really hard to empower residents in low-income housing, and they do a lot of great work right in their own community. I would, certainly give some resources to them. There are youth programs that people are trying really hard to help young people to move ahead in life. So dedicating resources to people and organizations that are focusing on the issues that people care about in Bridgeport is definitely.
So, Gemeem, when you were in high school, you had a civics requirement, is that correct?
Yes.
And I think that's a state program that was instituted not too long ago, where we have to have civics, you have to, in order to graduate. That's a really good way to get involved early on. I know the League has done some work with some young women on the Miss Presidents organization to try to get like 8th grade girls to do elections and set up things. And I think part of that, the challenge is to take the intimidation out of it. Because I know I'm an elections moderator in Norwalk, and one of the things that always is surprising to me is how many folks feel confident enough they're very hesitant about voting. They feel like they don't know enough, or they feel like they don't know enough about not even just what the issues are, but how to even vote.
Yeah.
Haven't done it before. They haven't done enough. We only do it once a year. Maybe if you're really involved, you might vote on a budget, but it's really difficult to get people.
I think Laura.
I know in Bridgeport that's been a real struggle because of shenanigans, if you will, with the absentee voting and stuff. So I know that's been a struggle. Do you feel that younger people are getting more involved? Are they energized? Because there's a lot of hard problems in our country, in our state, and in the world. And I'm always impressed that they're not discouraged.
Yeah. Well, what we see when we talk to young people is that they certainly know what's going on, right? Even, we were just talking to some 6th through 8th grade or 6th through 9th grade girls last week, and they are certainly keyed into the issues that are important, and they know what's going on in the city in terms of that. I think that the level of cynicism that some people who are a little bit older, maybe their parents and things like that, they felt really empowered after we talked to them to try and tackle some of that, with their parents. So I have hope for the future that because young people have access to so much information from different places, they know what issues are important to them. And by the time these young women go to vote, they'll be informed voters, and they will be able to inspire more people. I think in that way, when we're on the ground, we are very encouraged by that. I think, all the stats and all the things that come up that make us worried about young people, that we could look at those headlines and be discouraged, but when that there are people who can cut through all of that, and we just have to continue organizing and doing the work, it makes it have a little more confidence.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I heard somewhere recently that they said, we can't be cynical about it. We have to pay attention. What's the option? giving up, not
Right.
moving forward. I mean, even as we were talking with Kay about where we were in the past, how we were, you know, the year of the woman, and Susan mentioned it too. The woman was that 1 year, and now we've gone back, and now we're kind of coming full circle. I think the good news about some of the disruption that was caused by 2016 and 2020, people started saying, well, wait a minute, how do we fix this? We need to get better. We need to do better. I mean, I remember when I was living overseas, and George Bush was president, we kind of kept it quiet that we were from the US. You know, people would ask us, well, where are you from? Because we didn't want to have the conversation. And I can't imagine what it must have been like in 2016. You know, so I think that that's one of the things that we have to be careful of is we always have to keep moving forward, even if we get pushback, even if there's not a lot on the ground that we can do right now. That doesn't mean it won't change. And I think you guys are certainly in the right spot, and I think that Jen now should be an inspiration across the state as to how things can get done with a few people who really care and want to make a difference. And I hope that folks will come away and say, you know what, maybe I'm just one person, but if everybody just does their part, I think it's important. Certainly, voting is the one thing to start with, and there's a lot we can do just by voting.
Yeah. Yeah, we always like to say, or I always like to say, you know, people just have to get in where they fit in. You know, I did not think when I was like, oh, I'm going to go back and get involved, that I would be like, or an organizer, president of an organization, co-director of an organization doing this work, you know, but we all develop. And so we just have to be open to that, but you just get in where you fit in. We were all volunteers when Jen now started. And, you know, for me, you know, my life and our work, you know, turned into this, but for some people, just making a donation is what they can do. And that is equally as important, whether it's $5 donation, a $10 donation, or $1,000 donation. You know, some people can make a phone call to a legislator. Some people cannot, but just if everyone just gets in where they fit in and commits to doing one thing, you know, that's how we strengthen our movement and keep the ecosystem like working together. And that's how we affect our politics. Like that's how that is politics, you know?
Right. I think that's a good point. Getting people where they are now and building on it is a really important thing. Okay, our time is up. I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you're interested in becoming more involved in your local community, I urge you to join the League, or as we have said, join to the parties at the local level. It's very important. We are a nonpartisan political organization dedicated to empowering voters and defending democracy. Visit our website, LWVCT.org, for more information about the League. And if you haven't done so, please come and take a tour of the Capitol and the Legislative Office Building. It will give you a whole new appreciation of the history of our state government and where it started. It's your house. Schedule a visit with your and you can see your senator and representative while you're there. They will be happy to see you, I promise. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Laura Smits. This has been the League of Women Voters and the Capitol Information Tours. Thank you for joining us.